The red warning light pulsed insistently across Timothy Drake's array of monitors, an unwelcome intrusion into the quiet solitude he had cultivated for the past 5 years. A low, guttural drone emanated from the proximity alerts, vibrating through the reinforced steel of his Nevada bunker. He leaned forward, his calloused fingers dancing across the holographic controls that shimmered above the console, bringing the perimeter feeds into sharp focus. After half a decade of unwavering silence, something had finally triggered his outer sensors, shattering the illusion of peace. "Computer, designate intrusion as Sector 7, he commanded, his voice raspy from disuse, yet retaining a firm edge honed from years of military discipline. The main screen flickered, momentarily displaying a cascade of complex algorithms before settling on a panoramic view of the desolate, rust-colored desert bathed in the fiery hues of the setting sun. A streak of intense light cut across the darkening sky, leaving a trail of iridescent plasma that lingered in the air like a phantom's breath. "Not a meteor," Tim muttered, his eyes narrowing as he zoomed in on the rapidly descending object. The vessel's sleek, aerodynamic design was unmistakably Aran, a testament to their advanced technology. But something was terribly wrong. The ship lurched erratically, hemorrhaging energy from what appeared to be massive breaches in its hull. Behind it, reality itself seemed to warp and tear, the very air rippling and distorting, forming bizarre, crystalline patterns that defied the laws of nature. Tim's jaw clenched, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. "Ethereals," he whispered, the word laced with a potent mixture of fear and resentment. He hadn't encountered them this close to his sanctuary in years, and the sight of their corrupting influence sent a shiver down his spine. The Aran ship wouldn't make it, he could already see it breaking apart, chunks of exotic metal and composite materials raining down across the desert floor like a morbid meteor shower. He tracked its descent through his network of surveillance drones, calculating the predicted impact zone. "Computer, provide a full spectral analysis of the crash site. Prioritize detection of survivors." His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, isolating thermal signatures amidst the chaos of the wreckage. The thermal imaging flickered to life just as the ship plowed into the earth, carving a half-mile-long trench through rock and sand, a brutal scar on the already ravaged landscape. 2 distinct heat signatures emerged from the wreckage, one adult, relatively stable, the other much smaller, flickering erratically. They were moving, albeit weakly, but the crystalline distortions were closing in with alarming speed. Tim grabbed his assault rifle from the wall rack, checking the charge on its power cell with a practiced flick of his wrist. 5 years ago, he had sworn never to get involved in another fight, to bury the ghosts of his past in the sterile confines of his self-imposed exile. He had lost too much, seen too many good people die trying to save a world that might already be beyond redemption. But something about those heat signatures tugged at him, a primal instinct overriding his carefully constructed defenses. A child. There was a child out there, caught in the crosshairs of an ancient conflict. "Damn it," he growled, punching in the access code to unlock his armory. The wall panel slid aside with a pneumatic hiss, revealing rows of weaponry and tactical gear he had hoped never to use again. He started grabbing equipment with swift, decisive movements, a combat suit woven from advanced ballistic fibers, a personal shield generator, a medkit stocked with potent pharmaceuticals and bioregenerative compounds. The bunker's early warning system shrieked again, the insistent alarm blaring through the confined space. The ethereal distortions were expanding exponentially, twisting everything they touched into impossible geometries. Soon, they would reach the crash survivors. Tim sealed his combat suit, the familiar hiss of pressurized air a morbid comfort. He grabbed a handful of plasma grenades, their surfaces cool and smooth against his gloved hand. "Computer, prep the surface elevator and give me a direct feed from Drone 3. The elevator hummed to life deep within the bunker's core, a mechanical leviathan stirring from its long slumber. A new image appeared on his heads-up display, transmitted directly from the drone hovering above the crash site. The adult survivor was female, her green skin marking her as Aran. She clutched a small boy to her chest, her movements clumsy and desperate as she stumbled through the wreckage. Even through the grainy drone feed, Tim could see the raw terror etched on her face as she glanced back at the approaching crystalline horror. He recognized the formation taking shape behind them, a patriarch, one of the humans who had willingly merged with the ethereal consciousness, sacrificing their individuality for the promise of transcendence. Its body was a shifting, pulsating mass of geometric patterns, beautiful and horrifying all at once. "Please," the woman's voice crackled through his emergency comms, laced with static and desperation. "If anyone can hear this, help us. Help my son. I'll give anything." Tim stepped into the elevator, his finger hovering over the ascent control. He could still walk away, seal the bunker, let whatever was happening out there play out without him. He owed them nothing. The woman screamed through the drone feed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the desolate landscape. Tim watched as crystalline tendrils, sharp as shattered glass, reached for her child. "Damn it to hell," he muttered, his resolve hardening. He slammed his fist down on the ascent control, the elevator surging upward, carrying him toward a fight he never wanted, a confrontation he had desperately tried to avoid. But some choices, he knew, weren't really choices at all. The desert air hit Tim like a physical blow when the elevator doors ground open. 5 years of climate-controlled isolation hadn't prepared him for the scorching heat that still lingered, even after sunset. His combat suit's environmental systems kicked in, regulating his temperature and filtering the toxic air, but he could still taste the metallic tang of irradiated dust on his tongue. The crash site glowed with an eerie luminescence in the twilight, pieces of Aran technology scattered across the desert floor like fallen stars. Through his helmet's enhanced vision, he could track the woman's frantic path through the debris field. She was moving fast, driven by a primal instinct to protect her child, but it wasn't fast enough. The patriarch was gaining on them, its crystalline form radiating an oppressive aura of alien power. "Hey!" he shouted through his external speakers, his voice amplified and distorted by the helmet's comm system. "This way!" The Aran woman's head snapped toward his voice, her emerald eyes widening in surprise. Even at this distance, her beauty was startling, otherworldly. It wasn't just her vibrant skin, but the way she seemed to emit a faint, ethereal luminescence, her silver hair streaming behind her as she ran. The boy in her arms couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, his features a perfect blend of human and Aran characteristics. The patriarch's crystalline form towered behind them, at least 15 feet tall now, its surface catching the last rays of sunlight, fracturing them into prismatic patterns that hurt Tim's eyes even through his filtered visor. "Surrender the child," it boomed, its voice resonating on frequencies that seemed to vibrate through Tim's bones, making his teeth ache. "Evolution cannot be denied." Tim dropped to one knee, bringing his rifle to bear. The weapon hummed to life, charging with pent-up energy. "Over here. I'll cover you." The woman changed course, sprinting toward him with a renewed surge of adrenaline. As she drew closer, he could see the desperation in her golden eyes, the way her skin pulsed with what he assumed were fear-induced bioluminescent patterns. The patriarch thrust out one geometrically perfect arm, crystalline spikes erupting from the ground in the woman's path, forming a deadly barrier. She leaped with inhuman grace, twisting in mid-air to shield her son from the razor-sharp formations. Tim opened fire, unleashing a torrent of plasma bolts that streaked through the air and struck the patriarch's surface. The impacts created spiderweb cracks that spread across its crystalline structure, only to seal themselves almost instantly. But it was enough to draw its attention, to momentarily disrupt its relentless pursuit. "Human," it said, turning its faceted head toward him, its voice laced with disdain. "You interfere with matters beyond your comprehension. Yeah. Comprehend this." Tim triggered one of his plasma grenades, hurling it with pinpoint accuracy at the creature's base. The explosion erupted in a blinding flash of light and a concussive wave of energy, sending crystalline shards flying in all directions. The patriarch staggered, its perfect geometry momentarily disrupted. The woman reached him, breathing hard, her chest heaving. Up close, her otherworldly beauty was even more striking, but Tim forced himself to focus on the tactical situation. They were far from safe. The elevator's 30 meters back. When I give the signal. No time, she gasped, cutting him off. He's already in the crystalline matrix. Distance won't save us. As if to prove her point, geometric patterns began spreading across the ground around them, the very air shimmering and distorting as reality warped and folded in on itself. The Patriarch was already reforming, larger and more menacing than before, its crystalline structure hardening, becoming even more resistant to his attacks. Your resistance is mathematically futile, it declared, its voice echoing through the desolate landscape. The child's genetic sequence is required for the Great Convergence. Tim grabbed the woman's arm, his grip firm. My bunker has shield generators. If we can just... Mom, the boy cried out, his voice filled with terror. A crystal spike erupted between them, forcing them apart, severing their connection. The woman stumbled, nearly dropping him, her face contorted with anguish. Tim fired another burst at the Patriarch, but this time the plasma bolts were absorbed into its structure, the energy redirected and amplified, emerging as deadly shards that he barely managed to dodge. His shield generator whined in protest at the impact, its protective field flickering ominously. Your weapons are based on linear physics, the Patriarch mocked, its voice dripping with condescension. We have transcended such limitations. The crystalline growth was accelerating now, forming a maze of geometric barriers around them, cutting off their escape routes, one by one. Tim recognized the pattern, the strategic precision with which the Patriarch was manipulating reality. Give me the boy, Tim told the woman, his voice calm and resolute despite the escalating chaos. I'm faster in this suit. She hesitated for just a moment, her eyes darting between Tim and the Patriarch, weighing her options. Then, with a sigh of resignation, she passed her son to him. The child was surprisingly light, his skin warm against Tim's armored gauntlet. His name is Raiden, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Keep him safe, please. Before Tim could respond, she spun toward the Patriarch, her hands glowing with strange, ethereal energy. You want transcendence, she shouted, her voice ringing with defiance. Come get it. She launched herself at the crystalline entity, her body erupting in a brilliant flash of light. The Patriarch actually stepped back, its perfect geometry wavering for a moment, its multifaceted eyes widening in what Tim could only interpret as surprise. Run, she screamed at Tim, her voice strained but resolute. The boy is everything. Tim ran. He hated himself for it, every fiber of his being screaming in protest, but years of tactical training took over, overriding his emotions. Complete the mission. Protect the asset. He sprinted through the crystal maze, using his suit's enhanced strength to leap over the lower barriers, his movements swift and efficient. Raiden clung tightly to his neck, his small body trembling. Behind them, he heard the woman crying out in what could have been pain or triumph. The ground shook with enormous impacts, the air crackling with energy. He didn't look back. The elevator was just ahead, its entrance still clear of crystalline corruption. 20 meters. 10. 5. Not enough. The Patriarch's voice boomed through the air, laced with triumph. Tim's legs locked up as geometric patterns began crawling up his combat suit, immobilizing him. He managed 2 more steps before freezing completely, a prisoner in his own armor. Mom! Raiden screamed, his voice filled with heart-wrenching terror. Help! The woman appeared beside them in a flash of light, her skin now covered in intricate, glowing patterns that pulsed with raw energy. She pressed her hands against Tim's suit, and suddenly, he could move again, the crystalline paralysis breaking its hold. They practically fell into the elevator, their bodies entangled. Tim slammed the descent control, and the doors began to close with agonizing slowness. The last thing he saw was the Patriarch's massive form looming over them, its crystalline body now incorporating swirls of green energy, the same color as the woman's skin. Your sanctuary cannot protect you, it declared, its voice echoing through the closing gap. The convergence is inevitable. The doors sealed shut with a resounding clang, plunging them into darkness. The elevator plunged downward, carrying them into the depths of Tim's underground bunker, a temporary refuge from the horrors above. Tim grabbed Eve's hand, pulling her away from the encroaching crystalline growth. "No time for that now," he said, his voice gruff but laced with an urgency that belied his attempt at stoicism. He scooped up Raiden, holding him securely against his side. "Let's move." Section 4 is the deepest part of the bunker. It's got reinforced shielding, designed to withstand a direct hit. Eve didn't protest, her golden eyes fixed on the rapidly spreading corruption. "It will slow them, but not stop them. They adapt, Timothy. They learn. The closer we get to the vaults, the stronger they become." They moved quickly through the narrow corridors of the bunker, the emergency lights casting long, flickering shadows that danced across the walls. Tim led the way, his senses on high alert, his weapon raised and ready. Years of training had instilled in him an almost instinctive awareness of his surroundings, a sixth sense that warned him of danger long before it became apparent. Raiden clung to him, his small body trembling. "What are they, Timothy?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What do they want?" Tim hesitated, unsure of how to explain the unexplainable to a child. "They're a sickness, Raiden. A very old, very powerful sickness. They want to change everything, to make everything like them." Eve placed a hand on Raiden's head, her touch gentle. "They want to steal what makes us special, Raiden. What makes us, us." They reached the entrance to Section 4, a massive blast door sealed with multiple layers of reinforced steel and energy shielding. Tim punched in the access code, his fingers moving quickly across the keypad. The door hissed open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor that stretched into the depths of the bunker. As they stepped inside, Tim activated the section's internal defense systems. Automated turrets emerged from hidden compartments in the walls, their targeting sensors locking onto any potential threats. A network of laser grids flickered to life, creating an invisible web of deadly energy. "This will buy us some time," Tim said, his voice echoing through the corridor. "But we need to understand what we're up against. What are these vaults, Eve? What's so special about them?" Eve led them to a small, circular room at the end of the corridor. The room was dominated by a large, holographic projector that cast a shimmering image of a complex, geometric structure in the air. "These vaults were built by the first ones," Eve said, her voice filled with reverence. "They were the creators of both our species, the Aran and the humans. They foresaw the rise of the ethereals, the coming of the Great Convergence. They built these vaults as a safeguard, a repository of knowledge and technology that could be used to fight back." "And what kind of technology are we talking about?" Tim asked, his skepticism evident in his tone. "Magic wands? Force fields? Because so far, nothing I've seen has been able to stop those things out there." Eve turned to him, her golden eyes glowing with an intensity that startled him. "The vaults contain technology that transcends our understanding of physics, Timothy. Technology that can manipulate reality itself. Technology that can sever the ethereal connection, banish them from this plane of existence." "And Raiden?" Tim asked, his gaze shifting to the boy, who was now staring at the holographic projection with a look of fascination. "What does he have to do with all of this?" "Raiden is a conduit," Eve explained, her voice softening. "He possesses a unique genetic anomaly that allows him to interface with the vault systems. He can access its knowledge, control its power. He is the key to saving both our species." Tim stared at Raiden, his mind reeling. The boy was just a child, innocent and vulnerable. How could he possibly shoulder such a burden? "That's a lot to put on a kid," Tim said, his voice laced with concern. "Are you sure he's ready for this?" "He doesn't have a choice," Eve said, her voice hardening. "None of us do. The ethereals are coming, Timothy. They will consume everything. Raiden is our only hope. As if on cue, the bunker shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and the holographic projection wavered. The sound of crystalline growth echoed through the corridors, growing louder with each passing second. "They're here," Tim said, his voice grim. "They've breached the outer defenses." Eve grabbed Raiden's hand, her grip firm. "We need to reach the vault, Timothy. Now. Before it's too late." Tim nodded, his resolve hardening. He had made a choice, a commitment. He would protect Eve and Raiden, no matter the cost. He would lead them to the vault, even if it meant facing the ethereals head-on. "All right," he said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's move. But from here on out, we do things my way. No more secrets, no more half-truths. I need to know everything, Eve. Everything they are doing. Understand?" Eve met his gaze, her golden eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Understood, Timothy. I will tell you everything." They moved deeper into Section 4, navigating the labyrinthine corridors, their senses on high alert. The crystalline growth was spreading rapidly, transforming the bunker into a grotesque parody of its former self. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a group of automated security drones, their targeting sensors locked onto the crystalline formations. The drones opened fire, unleashing a torrent of plasma bolts that tore through the geometric structures, vaporizing them in a flash of light. "The defense systems are still functioning," Tim said, his voice filled with relief. "They can slow them down." But Eve shook her head, her face grim. "The ethereals can corrupt technology, Timothy. They can turn our own weapons against us." As if to prove her point, the security drones suddenly turned, their targeting sensors locking onto Tim and his companions. The drones opened fire, their plasma bolts streaking toward them with deadly accuracy. "Eve, Raiden, down!" Tim shouted, diving for cover behind a reinforced steel pillar. The plasma bolts slammed into the pillar, showering them with sparks and debris. "What's happening?" Raiden cried, his voice filled with terror. "The ethereals are controlling them," Eve said, her voice strained. "We need to disable them, quickly." Tim peered out from behind the pillar, assessing the situation. The drones were heavily armed and armored, their targeting sensors unwavering. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. "Eve, can you do anything?" he asked, his voice filled with desperation. "Can you use your powers to stop them?" Eve shook her head, her face pale. "I can't, Timothy. Not yet. I'm not strong enough. I need to reach the vault, to connect with its energy. Only then can I fight back." Tim cursed under his breath. They were trapped, caught between the encroaching crystalline growth and the corrupted security drones. Their situation was growing more desperate with each passing second. Then, an idea sparked in Tim's mind, a desperate gamble that might just give them a chance to survive. "Eve," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I have a plan, but it's risky. Do you trust me?" Eve met his gaze, her golden eyes filled with unwavering faith. "With my life, Timothy." Tim nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's do this." He drew a plasma grenade from his belt, activating its timer. "I'm going to create a diversion. You and Raiden, head for the emergency exit at the end of the corridor. It leads to a maintenance tunnel that should be clear of crystalline growth." "But what about you?" Eve asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'll be right behind you," Tim said, his voice reassuring. "Just go. And trust me." He tossed the plasma grenade into the center of the corridor, then leaped out from behind the pillar, firing his weapon at the security drones. The plasma bolts tore through their armor, causing them to explode in a shower of sparks and debris. The explosion disoriented the remaining drones, giving Eve and Raiden a chance to escape. They sprinted down the corridor, heading for the emergency exit. Tim knew that he only had seconds before the remaining drones regained their composure. He activated his personal shield generator, creating a protective barrier around himself. Then, he charged forward, firing his weapon with both hands, his movements swift and deadly. The drones unleashed a torrent of plasma bolts, but the shield generator deflected most of the impacts. Tim weaved through the energy blasts, his agility surprising even himself. He reached the remaining drones, disabling them one by one with precise shots to their targeting sensors. Then, he turned and sprinted down the corridor, heading for the emergency exit. As he reached the exit, he saw Eve and Raiden waiting for him, their faces filled with relief. He deactivated the emergency door, its heavy metal frame sealing with a loud clang. They were safe, for now. But Tim knew that their journey was far from over. The ethereals were still coming, and the vault was still out of reach. The maintenance tunnel leads to an abandoned section of the bunker, Tim said, his voice grim. It's not safe, but it's our only chance. Let's move. He led them into the darkness, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The vault was their only hope, and they would reach it, no matter the cost. Tim pulled away from Eve, his mind reeling from the intensity of her offer. The raw vulnerability in her eyes, the sheer desperation to protect her son, it was a potent combination that threatened to shatter the carefully constructed walls around his heart. But there was no time for personal reflection, the urgency of their situation demanded immediate action. We can talk about this later, he said, his voice rough. Right now, we need to focus on getting out of here. Those doors won't hold for long. He turned to Raiden, who was watching them with wide, apprehensive eyes. Hey, sport, you okay? Raiden nodded, his gaze darting between Tim and Eve. What's happening, Timothy? We're just having a discussion, Tim said, forcing a reassuring smile. Nothing to worry about. We're going to move to a safer place, okay? He grabbed his weapon and led them toward a reinforced access tunnel that connected to the bunker's lower levels. This tunnel leads to a series of abandoned storage facilities. They're not as heavily shielded as this section, but they're less likely to be targeted by the ethereals. As they moved through the tunnel, Tim's tactical sensors continued to register the encroaching crystalline growth. The ethereals were adapting, finding new ways to penetrate the bunker's defenses. It was only a matter of time before they breached the access tunnel. Eve, Tim said, his voice low. Tell me about these vaults. What exactly are we looking for? Eve hesitated for a moment, then began to speak, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and dread. The vaults are dimensional anchors, Timothy. They were created by the first ones to stabilize the fabric of reality, to prevent the ethereals from fully manifesting on this plane of existence. And how do they work? Tim asked, his skepticism still present. What kind of technology are we talking about? It's beyond our current understanding, Eve said, her brow furrowing. The first ones mastered energies that we can only dream of. They could manipulate space and time, bend reality to their will. So, magic? Tim asked, raising an eyebrow. Eve shook her head. Not magic, Timothy. Science. But a science so advanced that it appears to be indistinguishable from magic. They reached the entrance to the storage facilities, a series of massive, interconnected chambers filled with rusting machinery and forgotten supplies. The air was thick with the smell of decay and dust. This place is a graveyard, Tim muttered, his senses on high alert. We need to be careful. There could be other survivors. As if on cue, a voice echoed through the chambers, rough and menacing. Well. What do we have here? Looks like we got some company. Tim spun around, his weapon raised, and saw two figures emerging from the shadows. The first was a hulking man with a grizzled beard and a shotgun slung over his shoulder. The second was a young woman with sharp eyes and a medkit strapped to her thigh. Who are you? Tim demanded, his voice hard. "And what do you want?" The man chuckled, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "My name is Silas, and this here is Mara. And what we want, depends. What have you got worth taking?" Tim narrowed his eyes, assessing the situation. Silas and Mara were clearly survivors, hardened by years of living in this desolate wasteland. They were dangerous, but they also might be their only chance of survival. "We're not looking for trouble," Tim said, his voice carefully controlled. "We're just passing through. We need to reach a certain location." "And what location would that be?" Silas asked, his voice suspicious. "That's none of your concern," Tim said, his grip tightening on his weapon. Silas grinned, revealing a set of yellowed teeth. "Everything's my concern out here, friend. Especially when you're wandering around with a pretty green lady and a kid. Those ethereals got everyone on edge." Eve stepped forward, her eyes glowing with a faint luminescence. "We are not your enemies, Silas. We are trying to save this world." Silas scoffed. "Save the world? That's a laugh. The world's already gone to hell. Ain't nothing left to save." "That's not true," Eve said, her voice filled with passion. "There is always hope. We just need to find it." Mara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Raiden. "What's so special about the kid?" she asked, her voice softer than Silas's. "Why are those ethereals after him?" Tim hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But he knew that they needed Silas and Mara's help if they were going to reach the vault. "Raiden is special," Tim said, his voice low. "He has a unique ability that the ethereals want to exploit. We need to protect him at all costs." Silas and Mara exchanged a look, their expressions unreadable. Then, Silas nodded, his face hardening. "All right," he said, his voice decisive. "I'll help you. But you gotta understand, I'm not doing this for free. I want supplies, weapons, anything you can spare." "Agreed," Tim said, his relief evident in his voice. "We can work something out." "Good," Silas said, his grin returning. "Then let's get moving. Those ethereals ain't gonna wait around for us to finish our little powwow." Silas and Mara led them through the maze of storage facilities, their knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. They knew the hidden passages, the safe routes, the places to avoid. As they moved deeper into the facilities, they encountered signs of other survivors, makeshift shelters, abandoned campsites, graffiti scrawled on the walls. It was clear that this place had once been a refuge for those fleeing the ethereal corruption. "What happened to them?" Tim asked, his voice grim. "Where did they go?" Silas shrugged. "Some moved on, looking for a better place. Some got caught by the ethereals. Some, well, let's just say this place ain't kind to the weak." As if to underscore his point, they rounded a corner and stumbled upon a gruesome scene, a group of corpses lying in a pool of blood, their bodies twisted into grotesque shapes. "Ethereal corruption," Mara said, her voice grim. "They didn't stand a chance." Raiden gasped, his face turning pale. Eve pulled him close, shielding him from the sight. "We need to be careful," Tim said, his voice low. "This place is crawling with danger." They continued on, their senses on high alert, until they reached a massive, steel door that sealed off the last chamber of the storage facilities. "This is it," Silas said, his voice hushed. "Beyond this door lies the entrance to the old mine shafts. They lead to the desert, and if the legends are true, to the place you're looking for." Tim approached the door, examining the locking mechanism. It was old, but still functional. "Can you open it?" Tim asked. Silas shook his head. "Not without the access code. And that's been lost for years." Tim cursed under his breath. They had come so far, only to be stopped by a locked door. "There has to be a way," Eve said, her eyes scanning the chamber. "There is always a way." As she spoke, Raiden stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the steel door. He reached out a hand and touched the cold metal, his fingers tracing the contours of the locking mechanism. Then, a strange glow emanated from his fingertips, a faint, ethereal light that pulsed with raw energy. "I can open it," Raiden said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can feel it." Tim and Eve exchanged a look of stunned surprise. Raiden was already proving to be the key to their survival. Tim stepped back, giving Raiden room to work. "All right, sport," he said, his voice encouraging. "Show us what you can do." Raiden closed his eyes, his brow furrowing in concentration. The glow from his fingertips intensified, spreading across the steel door, illuminating the chamber with an eerie light. Then, with a loud click, the locking mechanism disengaged, and the steel door swung open, revealing a dark, gaping tunnel that led into the unknown. "Well, I'll be damned," Silas said, his voice filled with awe. "The kid's got the magic touch." Tim nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. They were one step closer to the vault, but the journey ahead was sure to be fraught with peril. He glanced back at Eve, her golden eyes glowing with determination. "Ready?" he asked. Eve nodded, her grip tightening on Raiden's hand. "More than ready, Timothy. Let's go save the world." Tim took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness, his weapon raised, his senses on high alert. The desert pursuit had begun, and the shadows of the past were closing in fast.